Hello and welcome to Lore Watch, a roundtable freeform discussion about lore in our favorite video games. I'm your host, Joe Perez, one of several lore-focused folks from Blizzard Watch, and I've got my stupendous chip-eating co-host with me today, Matt Rossi. How you doing today, Matt?
Actually, I'm looking at them now. They're crackers.
You said chips before.
I said chips. No, I did, because I was eating Doritos earlier, but I switched to the crackers at some point, and I didn't notice.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Today I didn't do that just to swerve on him. I seriously am now eating crackers.
100% he did. Headcanon accepted. So today we're going to be answering hopefully more than one question. We'll see. We got a very, very long one that actually is very, very interesting from Emberblade, who happens to be a Dark Iron warrior. Emberblade has plenty of questions about, well, Dark Iron. So we figured, hey, why don't we answer as many of those as we can? So we'll take some pauses in between and the myriad of questions and answer them as best we can. But it starts with Greening Watchers. I have a number of related questions about Dark Iron and Blackrock Mountain, and I hope you find some of them interesting. Well, we found most of them interesting, so there you go. So Blackrock Mountain, pre-Cataclysm, there were Dark Irons and Blackrock Orcs who hated each other, hated the Alliance, and hated the Horde. Then, during the Cataclysm, some of the Dark Irons joined the Alliance, some of the Blackrocks joined the Horde, and the remaining decided that they didn't hate each other anymore. So what caused the internal schisms in both groups, and what made the ones who were left behind ally with each other? What changed? My only theory is that Deathwing's return made the Blackrock Dragonflight and the Fire Elementals allied together. But what was their beef with each other before that?
Okay. This is complicated. Essentially, and this requires a little bit of backstory here. The Blackrock clan was the clan of the then war chief, Rend Blackhand. Not Rend Blackhand, I'm sorry, Blackhand himself, the father.
The original Blackhand, yes.
Rend and Maim's father. He was there. The Blackrock were his clan and Orgrim Doomhammer's clan. And when Orgrim Doomhammer turned and murdered Blackhand and became war chief, most of the Blackrock fell in line under him. Some of them, however, fell in line under his sons, Maim and Rend. Maim and Rend had been aged into adulthood by warlocks, so they went from like being little children to being full-fledged adults. As you might expect from that experience, their impulse control wasn't great. I mean, they're orcs, they're orc toddlers who've been turned into 7.5-foot tall killing machines, but never actually educated or anything. So they still kind of think like toddlers. Maim and Rend wanted to kill Orgrim for what he did to their dad, but they weren't really good at hiding that. So Orgrim basically banished them and their supporters. He was like, you go be over there. I don't have time for your crap. And that's what led to the Blacktooth Grin clan. Now, the Blacktooth Grin clan is actually what the Blackrock Orcs in that mountain are.
Yes.
The reason they're called Blackrock at this point is because all the other Blackrock Orcs kind of had a problem. At the end of the Second War, the orcs had advanced up to what is now Lordaeron. And that's the exact moment where Gul'dan grabbed his various followers and took off across the ocean to try and find the Tomb of Sargeras. And he did, but it didn't work out for him. That's not really related to this. But as a result, the core of the Blackrock clans, a core that was like loyal to Orgrim, had to like close up around him to try and keep him safe as they retreated from Lordaeron. And they retreated all the way down the continent until they got to Blackrock Mountain, which they thought was a good omen. You know, they'd inhabited Blackrock Mountain before. They were like, yeah, we'll make our stand here. And it looked like it was going really well. Doomhammer and his honor guard killed Anduin Lothar. Some say it was an ambush. Some say it wasn't. That's because the canonical ending has never been established. But regardless, Lothar fell. In the book, this is when Turalyon, who was a paladin, but who had been following Lothar as his like second in command, picked up Lothar's broken sword and just went nuts. He went ham on the Horde, basically. And almost all the Blackrock who were trying to defend Orgrim died, because Turalyon was a beast, and he nearly killed all of them. And he was really quite incensed at their even presence on Azeroth, because, as he pointed out, they were alien. They were not from Azeroth. They weren't supposed to be there as far as he was concerned. And so he nearly killed everybody. In the end, he managed to stop himself, and they captured Orgrim Doomhammer. If you ever wonder how Doomhammer ended up, wandering the woods alone by himself, it's because he got caught on top of Blackrock Mountain, and all of his loyalists got killed, which meant that the only remaining Blackrock orcs were the ones from the Blacktooth Grin.
Which were, if I remember correctly, they were originally spun off as like almost like a scouting party, weren't they?
Yeah, it was basically, I want to keep you out of my way. I want you not to be a problem for me. So
I'll send you ahead of time. Yeah, I'll send you up ahead, and if you die, it's not a big loss for me.
Yeah, Maim and Rend they knew they hated Orgrim and they wanted to kill him, but they also really liked killing everybody else. And as long as they were basically being used in this way, they were happy enough. But with the rest of the Blackrock clan, effectively, the ones on Azeroth just wiped out. The ones on Draenor were still there, obviously, but the ones on Azeroth were wiped out. The Blacktooth Grin were the only real Blackrock orcs left in Azeroth. They retreated into the mountain and grabbed hold of what they could hold. In fact, this is interesting because Blackrock Mountain had originally been taken by Gul'dan's followers.
Mm-hmm.
What Cho'Gall and the various Shadow Council followers of Gul'dan. So they were gone because Gul'dan had pulled them all out in order to go find the Tomb of Sargeras. So there was a big space of the mountain that had been recently held that the Dark Irons had not gotten a chance to go back up and try and take. So they basically just settled in. And as to how they became servants of the Black Dragonflight, it's really simple. Deathwing's son, Nilfarion, showed up and said, "Serve me or die." And they were like, okay.
But not just serve me or die, but serve me or die. But if you serve me, I'll give you some really cool stuff to do.
Yeah, you like riding dragons, right? I've got these special, chromatic.
I've got
dragons
a rookery. I've got a rookery at your disposal.
Yeah, we can work together. But make no mistake, I'm in charge, and if you push it, I will kill you. But if you don't push it, I can be a really kind and benevolent leader to you. Not to everybody, but to you, I can do that. And they went with it because why wouldn't they? At this point, though, Maim had been killed.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember how Maim died. I don't even know if it's ever been brought up.
I don't think so.
Yeah, but
I'm actually looking it up.
Go ahead and go look it up. Whatever happened to Maim, Rend was the only one left. And at this point, Rend had a few years under his belt. So he'd grown out of the terrible twos and was actually starting to be not a really great leader, but he was getting there. Like he was actually becoming a threat to the Horde. It wasn't that they hated the Horde. They specifically hated Thrall because he was Orgrim Doomhammer's apprentice, and they hated Doomhammer. So they hated Thrall because Thrall was like essentially Doomhammer 2, and they didn't want that. And they didn't get the whole idea of a Horde with like Tauren and trolls in it. Like, what is that? The Horde is orcs. Like occasionally we made deals with trolls, but go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Cool. Backtracking a little bit, this kind of makes a little bit of sense. So originally when the orcs retreated back to Blackrock Mountain, they struck a deal with the Dark Iron Dwarves, a temporary truce where the Dark Iron would kind of like leave the upper trenches alone because they couldn't afford to fight and the orcs couldn't afford to fight. So it was sort of more like a mutual sort of like ceasefire.
Yeah, under Cho'Gall, wasn't it?
I don't remember if it was under Cho'Gall or not. But regardless, what wound up happening was that deal was never intended to be in place forever. Both of the sides were planning on essentially flipping on the other to take the entirety of the mountain. And Ettrig actually does explain what happened. So there was a constant conflict, not open warfare, but constant conflict between the Dark Iron Dwarves and the Blackrock orcs. And what eventually happened is once they pushed the dwarves down and out of the city again and back down to the lower reaches, and with the assistance of some dragons, Maim died in that conflict. That was the moment when Maim died. So that's why partially probably why there was some continued bad blood between the Black Orcs and the dwarves, because if Rend is in charge of the Blackrock Mountain orcs, you're probably not going to be too happy with the folks that killed your brother.
Yeah, exactly. Especially since at this point, that was all he had left. Griselda was dead. His father was dead. So yeah. So that's basically how you end up with the Blackrocks serving the Black Dragonflight. In terms of why they were fighting the Dark Irons, there's a whole deal about the Dark Irons, but I'm trying to figure out how to digest this down. But we'll go back to the War of the Three Hammers, and we'll try and do this super fast. Joe, do you want to start, or do you want me to do it?
Please go right ahead.
Okay. War of the Three Hammers. Originally, the Dwarves of Ironforge were ruled by the Anvilmar clan. And the Anvilmar clan had the High Kingship. And that lasted for exactly one Anvilmar. When his son was going to come of age, the Bronzebeard clan were like, we're not supporting him. We're not going to... Your line will no longer be kings. We're going to take the throne. We'll honor you. We'll give you a permanent place in the Senate. Your line will always have a place in the Senate. And your names will be applied to things. But Motimus was great, but we're not taking any other Anvilmars. However, this caused strife in Ironforge. Not everybody wanted the Bronzebeards in charge. In fact, 2/3 of dwarves did not want the Bronzebeards in charge. The Wildhammer and Dark Iron clans both existed at the same time as the Bronzebeards. All three clans had basically formed during the reign of the Anvilmar. And when the Anvilmar were gently deposed, the Wildhammer didn't actually particularly want to fight about it. They just left.
Well, it was one of those things. They were in charge of the aviary stuff, right? So, like, for anybody who doesn't know who the Wildhammer are, they are the Wild Riders. They are the Griffin Riders that you see from all the RTS games. They're in charge of that, sort of like running messages back and forth. They were part and parcel with keeping the Empire running, essentially. The Dwarven Kingdom relied on them a lot of ways to sort of make sure everybody was still well communicated and everything else. And they were a very tribal, very shamanistic society of clan of very nature attuned dwarves that didn't want anything to do with any of the political strife. They didn't care. They knew that was not what they wanted. We're done. War's over. We're going to go back to our huts. We're going to go back to our rookeries. We're going to go back and make sure that we're raising our families and our birds and doing it the way we want to. We're not going to bother you, but don't bother us. We got our own stuff to deal with.
Yeah, like basically under the Anvilmars, the Wildhammers were an integrated part of the Dwarven Kingdom. When the Bronzebeards tried to take over, the loyalty that the Wildhammers felt towards the Anvilmars did not extend to the Bronzebeards. There was no reason. Like, we made deals, we made pledges, we served. We're not going to serve you. That's not, if the kingdom wants us, it puts an Anvilmar on the throne. If it doesn't do that, we're gone. And they left.
This all happened, what, about 250 some odd years before the Dark Portal?
A little more, because there's more to it. This is closer to 400. Because this part, the only real conflict at this part was the Dark Irons attempted to actually seize power. The Dark Irons were kind of the mystical, shadow-dwelling, they were into occultism and secrecy and so forth. They were like, okay, well, if somebody can just appoint themselves heads of the kingdom, why shouldn't it be us? Why should it be you? Just because you have connections? Just because you know the Anvilmars? Just because the Anvilmars are related to you? No. I don't see any reason you should be in charge. I don't see why we shouldn't. And so they basically, the Bronzebeards were sitting there controlling the army and most of the seats of power. The Wildhammers left with their transport network and all that. They just left, and it wasn't like they could stop them. What are they going to do? Chase them on their rams? They flew away.
And this is before the gnomes started coming around with the flying machines and the tram system and all this stuff too. This didn't exist yet.
Any of the things the gnomes were doing was papping in Gnomergon and didn't really affect the dwarves at this time. The Dark Irons made a pretty solid push. They had the sorcery that the Bronzebeards didn't have. They lacked the numbers, and they didn't control the army. In the end, rather than get wiped out fighting inside Ironforge, the Dark Irons retreated. And the leader, who at the time was just named Thaurissan, we don't know what his first name was, took his people and left. About 150 or so years later, the Dark Irons decided, okay, we've had all this time. Like, they retreated south to what is now Blackrock Mountain. At the time, it was still Blackrock Mountain, but they built a city not in the mountain. They built a city in the foothills around the mountain called Thaurissan.
Wasn't that actually still Redridge at that time? Because it hadn't blown up? It hasn't gone,
it was still
feral?
It was the mountains. It wasn't actually Redridge, but it was the mountains next to Redridge. But it was just mountains. It wasn't like the destroyed nightmare place it is now. There's another question later on. Yeah, there's another question in this thing that asks about that. So I'm actually going to flip down to that.
Sure.
The question that this person asked. Yeah. This person is Amina? I think Amina. I'm sorry that you don't have a pronunciation guide here. I'm doing the best I can. But Amina asks, if you have downtime, I was curious if the Searing Gorge / Badlands / Burning Steppes has always looked the way they do. Did they ever look like Dun Moreau or Loch Modan? And the answer is yes.
Yep.
And that's coming up. We're going to be talking about that. So I just wanted to let you know we're going there. The Dark Irons decided, we've had all this time. We went down here. We built this own kingdom of our own. And we're pretty proud of it. It's a good kingdom, but why? We've had all this time. We've built up our sorcery. We've learned. Our leader's son, Daegron, is now in charge. He's got his wife. Oh bloody heck, I can't remember her name.
Modgood. Yeah, I can never pronounce that name.
He's got his wife Modgood, and she's found this magical dagger that's really powerful. And the two of them think they can actually take both Ironforge. Yeah, Zalatath. If you're a priest, it's your knife. She was macking on Modgood when you were even born yet. But they decided they had a plan, and what they were going to do was they were going to attack both Ironforge and the Wildhammers in their main fortress. Grim Batal. They were going to attack both fortresses at once,
so that neither could come to the aid of the other one.
Yeah, exactly. And what's crazy is this almost worked. Like, they almost did it. Modgood was just unstoppable for a while. It wasn't until the head of the Wildhammer clan basically went out himself, fought his way through all of her guardians, and when she went to smite him down with her magic knife, she found out it was suddenly gone. It had just vanished.
It abandoned her in the middle of the counterattack, which allowed the Wildhammers to essentially kill her, cutting off the head of the snake.
Mm-hmm. And when they did that, the Wildhammers now had the advantage. The Dark Irons began to retreat. At the same time, the Bronzebeards, specifically the father of Magni, what are the other two names? Bronn, Magni, and I can never remember the third guy. The father of the three Bronzehammer, we would all know today. He managed to fight off the Dark Iron attack led by Daegron. Daegron retreated rather than get his head smashed in with a giant hammer. But he actually did love his wife. Yeah, thank you. But unlike, he did actually love his wife. They were actually in love. It wasn't just that they both were evil and liked to conquer things. They wanted to found their own dynasty. He loved her. And so when he found out she was dead, he was driven to into almost madness by grief and fury that they killed his wife. They were chasing them down this whole time. They were chasing them down into what is now the Blasted Lands, but at the time was just not. It was just mountains.
Yeah. So, and this is one of those interesting things that I think is sort of always, I don't want to say glossed over, but you got to understand, like, his armies were completely smashed and broken. His wife is dead. Both of his attempts have backfired to the point where now both clans are breathing down his neck in his own stronghold, in his place of power, in his place of respite, where he is basically kept his clan safe. And so he's backed up against the wall, desperate, angry. And so what does he do? He attempts a powerful conjuration, a last-ditch effort with ancient runes and texts and things that he had found, summoning the Fire Lord Ragnaros. And upon his arrival, Thaurissan and that entire landscape is blasted into fiery doom. The Wildhammers and the Bronzebeards have to retreat. Anybody who isn't lost in the initial blast runs as far away as they can, as fast as they can. Look at that land. They were caught in there. That's why there's skulls and skeletons and bones strewn out everywhere. And
the Searing Gorge and the Blasted Lands are the two different sides of this explosion. Mm-hmm. Blackrock Mountain was between them.
It was the epicenter. It was the center point.
Yeah. So the fact that Blackrock Mountain was there is the only reason the Searing Gorge isn't worse than it is. And it essentially shielded. I think it's the other way around. The Searing Gorge is actually where he touched down. That's the actual scar of his impact. And the mountain shielded some of the Blasted Land, so it's not quite as bad. But it's still very bad because it just went right around the freaking mountain. But yeah, when I was thinking when I say Deathwing, but I don't mean Deathwing. When Ragnaros appeared on Azeroth, a great deal of his power erupted forth in this massive explosion, and it directly destroyed the Searing Gorge and the Blasted Lands, and the plume of like ruin and ash and destruction coated the Badlands. That's why, if you notice, when you go from the Badlands to Dunmore, there's that tunnel they built into the mountain. That's because it was not passable anymore. Like, in order to get to and from that area, they needed to dig a giant tunnel in the rocks because the whole place was covered in ash and sand and detritus, and it's never recovered.
Yeah, and if anything, it's only gotten worse over the years, too, especially with the way that elementals have been running rampant with Ragnaros's ebb and flow of power. I mean, it's been pretty bad. The interesting things that come out of that, though, is the end result of sort of like the relationship with the clans is sort of at its what we come into when World of Warcraft starts, really. Which is now the surrounding landscape's completely decimated, but the Wildhammers and Bronzebeards having to band together to take out the Dark Iron Dwarves and basically put them back in their box, now start talking again. They start having friendly interactions because nothing unites people like a common enemy.
When you go to Dunmore, there's a statue of two dwarves holding weapons crossed against each other's arms, like, in a sign of solidarity. That's the father of Magni and Bronn and the father of the current Wildhammers.
Yeah.
So those two decided, maybe we don't want to live in the same kingdom, but you're not that bad.
I won't be ruled by you, but we can trade and you can pay us to do stuff for you. That's fine. But this also happens around the time where, at this point, everything that happened, everything with the Dark Irons, has completely irreparably cursed Grim Batal. The Wildhammers can't go back to their city, and Grim Batal is not a small place. It is a massive
Grim Batal is
place.
comparable to Ironforge. They actually built a place at least as big as Ironforge.
Exactly. That was the whole point. Like, the Ironforge, Grim Batal, and the Blackrock Mountain, they were all originally exactly the same. Like, that was their goal. They were supposed to be capital cities, right, of the Dwarven civilization.
I wouldn't know if I would say exactly the same, but definitely.
Well,
when the Dark Irons built theirs, the intention was ours will be better.
Yes. And
when the Wildhammers built theirs, they were like, I'm not going to let you show us up. So each of them went in different directions with it. But yeah, if you look at Grim Batal, look at the inside of it when you're running it. If you're running into the dungeon sometime, look around at the area and you'll realize it's huge.
Non-lore fact, but fun fact, Grim Batal actually uses the updated version of the original files for Ironforge. Ironforge actually was much bigger when they were originally starting to put it into the game, and it looked closer to Grim Batal with the multiple levels that you could actually fall to your death on, and then they decided to change it and bring it smaller into scope. But regardless, these places were massive. This is why they are massive when you go and run them. This is why when you go into Blackrock Mountain to run any of the dungeons or raids, there are so many of them, and it is so massive.
The Blackrock City, the ones that the dwarves made, went all the way. If there's multiple raids and dungeons that are basically built out of sections of it, and like all the parts that the Blackrock Orcs held and the parts that the Dragonflight hold, those were originally Dwarven. The part that you go into as Blackrock Depths, also part of the original Dwarven construction. And in terms of the question as to why they started getting along, is that they didn't. It wasn't that they got along.
Do you want to fight dwarves that are under the thumb of a fire elemental lord?
Yeah. More importantly, though, when Deathwing came forth again in Cataclysm, as you pointed out, I'm trying to think of how to explain this part. Magni's daughter, Moira, had fallen in love with the younger, the son of the Thaurissan that had blown the place up. The two of them had, he had her kidnapped initially, but unlike everybody else from Ironforge, who basically just treated her as like a trophy or her father's daughter and never really looked at her for herself, he valued her for her, and he talked to her, and they had conversations, and they both had like kind of similar resentments against their parents. Really,
interestingly enough, though, like, just to point this out, like, Wildhammer and Dark Iron seem to not care about gender as much as the Bronzebeard did.
That's also true, and that's very much from the Bronzebeard family, and specifically. Wildhammers and Dark Irons, women, man, whatever, it doesn't matter. But to the Bronzebeards, Magni was super obsessed with having a son.
An heir, because of what happened with the War of the Three Hammers. He didn't want that to happen again.
But he wouldn't accept his daughter as his heir. Had to be a son. and that's why he drove Moira away. So when she was kidnapped, it wasn't hard for Daegrin to basically, sympathize with her. Like, yeah, my dad was horrible too. I mean, granted, Daegrin wasn't a nice person, but he understood how she felt and he respected her opinion. And as a result, they fell in love because here was somebody who was actually treating Moira Bronzebeard like the Moira part was more important than the Bronzebeard part.
I think before we start moving into this, there are, I think, the two other sections of questions. We should probably read them off before we continue in. So I'm going to do that real quick here. So the other part of the question was, and what's the deal with the Dark Iron anyway, which is what we're dealing with right now. I first started playing at the beginning of Legion, and when I leveled my Dwarf Warrior through Dunmorrow, I took Commander Stonebreaker at his word and thought that Moira was a subversive. Many years later, I leveled a Dark Iron Warrior through those same quest lines, and I thought that Commander Stonebreaker was slandering Moira, and that she was genuinely angry that Ambassador Slaghammer betrayed her. Which one is correct? And I think this leads into what we're talking about here with Moira and what type of person she is.
Yeah. So Moira, united with Daegrin, they fell in love. They got married legally in the Dark Iron Society. They were legally married. That's important.
She's Empress.
So when we come down to rescue her and we kill Daegrin, if you ever run Blackrock Depths, that's what happens. Canonically, you kill him, and she's like, "No, you morons! He was my husband. That's why I helped him. I wasn't being mind controlled.
I was here by choice."
And you're like, oh, that's awkward. Well, I guess we're going to go tell Magni. Your daughter wanted to be there. Cut to Cataclysm. All the bad stuff is happening in the world. The various clans are doing various things. Everybody's up in a tussle. Magni decides that he has to figure out why this is happening, and he's going to use a ritual they found in Ulduar to do it. Because apparently Dwarf Kings doing rituals they don't understand is just something that happens from time to time.
Genetically coded.
Yeah. Magni does the ritual, and it works entirely too well. He is transformed into a motionless diamond, and suddenly Ironforge has no king. However, while they're all kind of in a tizzy trying to figure out what just happened, Moira returns and points out, I'm heir to Ironforge, and uses her dark irons to basically enforce martial law on the place. Anduin Wrynn happens to be there at the time. Varian Wrynn doesn't take his son being, captured lightly and shows up with a bunch of SA7 guys.
When we say military rule, we do mean lockdown. Like at this point, she has effectively removed Ironforge from communication with the Alliance entirely. Nothing in, nothing out.
And as a result of that, Anduin's there at the time, so now she has dinner with him, and she's not like super rude, and he even kind of he understands her problems because he's not had the best relationship with his dad either. So he gets that, okay, you have your reasons for this. I'm sure we can talk through it. And just as he's kind of getting her to the point where she's willing to accept that, Varian comes busting in with a bunch of assassins and wipes the floor with her people, and it's like gonna kill her. And Anduin's like, you can't kill her. She's the heir. She may be being a jerk at the moment, but she's right. This she is the head of Ironforge.
And that's a hell of a moment too, because she hears Anduin tell her father or his father she's right, and that's the first time anybody's ever said that,
other than her dead husband. Yeah,
other than her dead husband.
So, as a result of this, Varian does what he absolutely has no right to do, but everyone just lets him do it because they're really afraid of him. Quite frankly, he is kind of the Alliance's garage. Quite frankly, I'll be upfront with that.
Mm-hmm.
He decides there's going to be a council of hammers. There's not going to be one of them will lead. You're going to have a Bronzebeard representative, a Wild Hammer representative, and a Dark Iron representative, which will be Moira because she's the Empress of the Dark Irons. Which is ironic in that she's like a pureblood Bronzebeard, but she's not going to be the Bronzebeard representative. But at any rate,
that comes back later.
One of her uncles, I forget which one. Moni?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, he's the one who's in charge of the Bronzebeards. The Wild Hammers get that guy It's Falstead, right?
Falstead.
Yeah, he's in charge of the Wild.
Which almost wasn't Falstead, but thank you, Red Shirt guy.
Yeah, but so the three of them start a council to run Ironforge, and at first Moira's idea of how to do politics comes from the Dark Irons because she was never allowed to under the Bronzebeards.
Mm-hmm.
And the Dark Irons were ruled by Ragnaros for a very long time, and by through lots of other crazy minions from the Twilight's Hammer.
Although it is
And
interesting
Daygr-
to note that the Dark Irons were the ones that had a Senate out of all of them.
yeah, no, that's not true. The Bronzebeards had a Senate as well.
I thought they didn't. I thought they just had
Nope.
an advisory council.
Nope, they had an actual Senate. The Anvilmar family holds a traditional permanent seat in it. Everybody else is elected, but the Anvilmar family is just in it. That was the concession that the Bronzebeards made to the Anvilmars, so that the Anvilmars accepted the coup with little struggle. They didn't bother to try and fight it. They didn't try to unify people under them and fight the Bronzebeards. They just said, "All right, we'll just let you do." And the concession was, "Well, you'll get a permanent Senate seat."
Okay, then.
Yeah. I know this because I used to be a real big fan of the Thargus Anvilmar, the dwarf character from the comics.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I like Thargus. He was my favorite dwarf. But to get back to where we were going with this, because that's how Moira learned how to do politics. She learned through the Dark Irons, who her husband had to deal with the Twilight's Hammer his entire life. He'd been propped up as a leader after his father was destroyed in the explosion that signified Ragnaros's return to Azeroth. And the molten core was literally in the heart of the mountain. He'd had to deal with this his whole life. And so he learned how to be very duplicitous because he had to be. Not defending him. I'm not saying that Daygr Thaurissan was a good person. I'm just saying that's
what happened.
Upbringing he had.
Yeah.
So he taught Moira how to lead, so she picked it up. That's how she learned. If you want to talk about the Blood in the Snow thing, or if you want to talk about, I don't think you read the Blood in the Snow thing yet, did you?
Not yet, but I can read that off right now. I think.
Go ahead and read that, and then we'll move into this.
So, Blood in the Snow is a scenario that existed during Pandaria, and the question here is, I know that there was Blood in the Snow incident during Pandaria, but even that can be read in two ways. The surface reading is that Moira is fully committed to the Alliance. The other is that she cleverly took advantage of the situation and committed her forces, knowing that the other two clans wouldn't commit because they were afraid of her. In other words, she was the only reason they looked bad, while she came out looking.
This is true.
Both are true.
Both of those true readings are true. Moira does believe in the Alliance. Moira actually gets along very well with Anduin.
Yes, very much so.
And before that, she came to an understanding with Varian. I wouldn't say she liked him because he almost murdered her. You never really like somebody. Yeah, you're never going to like somebody who almost murders you. But she understood him. And that's one of the things about Moira. Her time amongst the Dark Irons has not turned her into a Dark Iron. She's not, but she does understand them. Moira's very good at understanding people. She understands how to play the game, how to play it certain ways. When you're talking about the original quest where Commander Stonebreaker thought Moira was a subversive, she was. Absolutely, she was. She came in, she seized power, and even after she was removed from direct power, she was placed on a council, which she would then begin gaming the system. There's a really cool story about the Wildhammer representative and why it ended up being Falstad.
There's something we also didn't talk about either, too. She has a trump card that we haven't talked about that very much is present during the initial lockdown with Varian coming in, and part of an additional reason of why he didn't kill her.
Yes.
She has the only heir. She has a son.
Yeah. Her son is the legitimate heir to both the Bronzebeard and Dark Iron thrones. The only thing Moira has to do now is get a really well-placed Wildhammer girl to marry him, and it's game over.
And the dwarves are united again, and it's one of those things where nobody can contest it. And that's the interesting thing about it. Sorry, I don't mean to it's fascinating because she's in this particular position of power, and she knows it. She can bide her time, and it's not for her. And that's the interesting thing. Like, she could seize that power herself if she really, really wanted to, but ultimately it's better for the dwarven people and her son and the lineage they're in to just unite everything back together, even if it's not under her.
Yeah, and that is what she is moving towards. So yes, she is subversive, but she is not subversive because she is malevolently cackling in the background. Oh, my evil plan's almost complete. She's subversive because she knows she literally has to subvert the culture they currently have to get her son on the throne. And he belongs on the throne. It is his by right. And so their society is going to have to change one way or another. So she's going to change it. And you're absolutely correct in that she exploited the situation in Blood in the Snow.
100%.
Absolutely, she did. She knew they were afraid that she'd do something if they moved their forces. So she moved her forces because she knew they wouldn't do something.
Additionally,
because they couldn't.
It also let her display her power. And that's another thing that a lot of people, she had been sort of written off a lot
Yeah, exactly. Her
That she
father had basically treated her like a thing.
but not only that, but like nobody understood that she was actually capable of displaying real power. Like she is literally a magic wielding. She's a priestess of the Dark Iron. She might be the only priestess of the Dark Iron that we know of. She is able to manifest that power, and she does so in the Blood and the Snow incident, which up until this point she has not displayed. And it was a very
Unless you were
calculated
in the
move.
fight. Unless you were in the Blackrock fight. Yeah. The only people who'd seen it up to that point were a bunch of adventurers who killed her husband.
Yep, and technically the same adventurers see it and report back again, but we wouldn't have reported it back then because we were just like dumbfounded and shocked that, yeah, she's there by her own choice, dude. Like, she doesn't want to come back. She doesn't like you very much right now. She's going to stay there. But this is her displaying her power in the open. Anybody, any of the Alliance forces could see it at this point and report back. And if you don't think that there are SI7 scouts watching that encounter, watching what she's doing, you would
Varian's right there. There's absolutely no way. Yeah. No, Varian's literally standing there. There's no way he didn't have at least like 10 SI7 guys around.
And then they go back and report to the rest of the council that no, she can call down the hurt. She can cause a lot of weird things to happen. She is very powerful, and she has talent that her father never displayed. Now she becomes that much more dangerous and can angle herself even better to subvert that system. And
at the same time, she rules the Dark Irons, but there's a big part of the Dark Irons who are just insane.
Mm-hmm.
They're nuts because a fire elemental god blew up their home.
And still whispers to them. Don't forget that.
Absolutely. He blew up their home. He took over their people. He basically enslaved them to build him like the place where he was going to rest and rebuild his power. So there's a lot of Ragnaros worshippers that she needs to root out. When you play a Dark Iron, that's a big part of like the place when you get in. They're like, you're going to be one of the Bastion. You're going to help us root them out. That's your role.
Mm-hmm.
It is one of the reasons when Joe sent the email, I was like, we really need to talk about this. The thing that really caught me is A, the Dark Iron stuff, but B, it is the complicated character that is Moira Bronzebeard.
She is one of my favorite characters because of that.
Yeah, she is power hungry and willing to do a lot to gain power. She is not just a cartoon villain doing it because, cackling moo ha ha ha. She's been slighted.
But it's also
ignored her.
It's an end goal in mind though too. Like that's the thing that makes it I don't want to say redeeming for me, but it makes it fascinating is because everything she's doing, yes, a villain would do in a certain capacity, subverting the system, seizing power for the system, using things and manipulating things to her advantage. Sure. But what is it all leading towards? And that's the thing that I think is fascinating because at the end of it, it's reuniting the Dwarven clans.
Uniting the Dwarven clans, and more importantly, ensuring that the people that would hurt her son are taken care of.
Yes.
Either they're destroyed, like the Dark Irons who worship Ragnaros and who don't recognize her son as legitimate because he's half Bronzebeard. They need to go. And so she is willing to do whatever it needs. We mostly only see her maneuvering on the other side from Ironforge and when she's on that council. But she's doing just as much maneuvering in the Dark Iron ranks. Like, when Stonebreaker says that she's a subversive, the thing is that I think she was genuinely angry about Ambassador Slaghammer, but I also think she very deliberately wanted to get him killed by you.
Yeah, 100%.
Because that way she can look back at the Dark Irons and say, look, he betrayed me and they killed him. I couldn't do anything. She's got plausible deniability. She can keep working against the people who are like trying to get her son, excluded without actually having to put her hand on it. And at the same time, like Blood in the Snow, she can step up and lead the Alliance. And by doing that, when she does the Blood and Snow movement, she brings the Dark Irons forth as part of the Alliance. They're fighting for the Alliance. This is the first time Dark Irons have actually seen the surface from the perspective of an ally.
Mm-hmm.
And they're fighting alongside these people. Now they've seen those people and those people have seen them. It normalizes them. She's really quite brilliant. It's actually, one of the reasons I like the Legion story where Magni comes back is that Magni finally recognizes her and accepts her ability.
I was just going to bring that up. Like Fault
You
Lines,
go for it. Talk about it.
Fault Lines is huge. So Fault Lines was the comic that was released during Legion. It was one of the intro comics that sort of led up to it. And it was this brilliant retelling. I shouldn't say retelling. It was this brilliant coming back of Magni to Ironforge, which he hasn't done in forever. And what does he find there? He finds his daughter, who, before he was awoken, we find out was actually visiting him as he was an immobile statue in Ironforge. Because don't forget, all the hammer stuff, all the console stuff, all the dwarf stuff that with Varian stepping in happened while he was still an inanimate object in the basement of Ironforge communing with Azeroth. And so she's there when he wakes up, and she's there when he leaves to go do his job. But it's when he comes back, and it's this sort of like tender moment. The interesting thing is she gets the one thing she never had from him while he wasn't a giant crystal man. And it's sort of this validation and acceptance. It's the, I've seen the person you've grown up to be, and I'm proud of you. And I don't think he says it exactly like that. There's his own particular way of saying it. But the last panel always sticks with me in this comic. And it's her watching him go off and her crying for the first time. Like showing an emotion that isn't like imperial. And it's just the two of them. There's nobody else around. But it's just this tender moment that he understands, like he knows, because she's been talking to him. He heard every word she said while he was immobile. And he's like, I know what you're doing. I'm proud of you. Keep going. I've got other stuff to do. I'll be back. And we see other interactions through like novels and things like that where Magni hasn't seen his grandson yet. And that might become a time where he does. And I think that might be the final play. And I think they might be building up to that, because if Magni, who is now the speaker of Azeroth, now publicly accepts his daughter, publicly accepts his grandson, that's the final nail in the coffin. Nobody can gainsay or deny that at that point. Who would?
Yeah. When Magni comes back, like he's literally been immobile the whole time. He wakes up and she starts moving around. They are like, do we give back the throne to him then? And he's the one that tells them no. Like they were willing to just say, okay, you're king again. And he's the one who's like, no, I will never be king again. What I have to do now is just more important than leading one kingdom. You've got these people leading you that'll have to do. And you can tell part of that was, as he says to Moira, the scene Joe's talking about is really well done, because she had no idea he heard any of it.
Mm-hmm.
So when he says something, she's like, you heard me? He goes, yeah, I heard all of it. You know, and he's finally figured out that he was wrong. And there's a whole thing about, when you talk, there's a bit where he's trying to talk to Azeroth when he's first become speaker, where he basically focuses on the fact that when he was being a father to Moira, the reason he failed was because he tried too hard to make her be what he wanted her to be.
Mm-hmm.
Because he was afraid. He was afraid to lose her. He was afraid that something would happen to her. And so he had to learn not to do that this time when dealing with Azeroth. Much, much larger child, but still same basic principle. And it's a really good exchange between the two of them. And it shows that Moira, again, is she a Machiavellian leader? Absolutely she is. She's fiendishly clever. There is no debating this. You can't, you look at the things she's done since. Yeah, Moira Bronzebeard, definitely someone to watch. But she's not doing this stuff because she's a cartoon supervillain. She's doing it because she realizes her society has to change. And it is actually really interesting. She is one of the better characters. I really kind of hope we get more of her in the future. Like, we kind of haven't seen her much since I'd say the end of
Legion,
Pandaria, and we saw her in Legion, but like, she's not as central in Legion as she was at the end of Pandaria, where she really steps up and you see her. So I would definitely like to see more of her.
I absolutely would as well. And I think we should probably bring up the last question here, last section of the question, since we are coming up on towards the end of our time. So the last part of it was, as for the Darkarans themselves, are they inherently sneaky, secretive, and the rest of it? Or is it just that they spend a lot of time being enslaved by genuinely bad people like Thaurissan, Modgood, and Ragnaros? Does the Alliance have a more negative view of them because the humans met the Bronzebeards first, or does the Alliance just find them convenient? They seemed fully integrated into the Alliance war effort in BFA, but some of their quests are on the nasty side, like burning 200 goblins with a fire golem. They are, by far, my favorite race in World of Warcraft, and I'd love to know more about it.
All right, well, I'm going to throw some stuff out here, and then you can throw some stuff out,
Go
Joe.
for it.
It is fair to say that their clan was founded by people that preferred subterfuge and occultism
Yep.
and all that. That's who they were when they started. It is not fair to say they were enslaved by Thaurissan or Modgud. Thaurissan and Modgud led them, but they were basically accepted as their leaders. They were not imposed on them. Ragnaros absolutely did impose himself on them. He absolutely did enslave them, but those two before him did not. For better or for worse, they followed Thaurissan and Modgud because they were, to a great degree, the Dark Irons felt cheated and slighted. Why did they have to leave? Why did they have to go off? Sure, the Wildhammers did, but that was their business. They wanted to. The Dark Iron didn't want to leave. They wanted to rule. Why shouldn't they rule? Why should it be the Bronzebeards? And that question was really never actually answered. Why did the Bronzebeards get to rule and they didn't? There's no real adequate answer here.
The only answer is politics.
The Bronzebeards were no more a royal line than the Dark Irons were. The Bronzebeards were not the Anvilmars. They just kind of stole the Anvilmar kingdom out from under them. Clearly, the Dark Irons might have been sinister, but that's a betrayal. No matter how you look at it, it's not like the Bronzebeards had the moral high ground here.
Mm-hmm.
This was just one group decided they were going to be in charge, and another group didn't agree. So when they left, they built their own kingdom, but they were never happy about what happened, and they decided they wanted payback. They wanted to get up and go back to which was just as much their ancestral home as it was the Bronzebeards, and they'd rule. Why shouldn't they? And if the Wildhammers were going to try and stop them, which they probably would, they'd have to be dealt with too. But it wasn't like, genuinely bad people enslaved us to do this. It's genuinely bad people convinced us this was the right thing to do by playing on the things that we already felt, which is the way a lot of things happen, like in life. There are people at the top who are pretty bad, but the people that they get to do their dirty work aren't always. They're not doing it because they're evil. They're doing it because it makes sense to them. That's what happened at first. When Ragnaros came along, it was very much a case of we're all under the thumb of an insane fire elemental god who in no way, shape, or form cares about us at all and who will burn us all to death if we don't do what he says. So yeah, that definitely had an effect on their culture and still has an effect on them. What would you say about the Alliance, though, their view of them?
So a lot of I think the Alliance has to do with sort of that has something to do with it as well, because you can't not know that they were involved in bringing Ragnaros here. First and foremost, you just look at the area, look at the Blasted Lands, look at Searing Gorge, and Redridge is right next door. There's no way they didn't feel that, hear that, or see that. And you send your scouts and you say, oh yeah, there's a giant fire elemental. Oh, by the way, we're hearing tell that the Dark Iron Dwarves are the ones that summoned it. Oh, that's no good. We've just lost huge swaths of land because of it. That's a problem, especially when you're trying to feed a kingdom and you're losing verdant land. That's a big deal. Especially in the aftermath of how many wars at this point. It's a big deal when you can't do any of that stuff to recover, when you start to notice that. But I also think their use of magic plays a large role in it, because originally, and this is sort of game mechanics informing lore, informing game mechanics sort of feedback loop. Originally, dwarves were supposed to be able to be mages and warlocks up front. This is in the manual. I literally have the vanilla World of Warcraft book sitting on my desk right now. They were there. When the game released, they weren't there. And it was because of whatever reason they decided to pull them back. But that became the Dark Iron. That became the mythos around the Dark Iron Dwarves. And so you have folks that are not in the Kirin Tor, but they still wield powerful magics, powerful enough to summon an elemental fire lord that has existed in time immemorial. They have strange magics that you've possibly never seen before, and they live in a mountain where you know that there are Blackrock orcs and warlocks are a thing. These are all things that the Alliance are not exactly keen on. Yes, the Alliance makes use of warlocks, but remember, in the early days, it wasn't a widely accepted practice.
Yeah, if you played a warlock in vanilla,
you had to go to a basement.
Yeah, you had to go to the basement of the Shady Inn, and it was like, I literally think it's called the Shady Inn.
It was called the Shady Inn, yeah.
Yeah, you had to go down into the basement to find your warlock trainer, and he was like, "Shh, don't be so loud. I don't want people to know."
And don't summon your imp in public. What are you doing? Like, yeah. It was a very secretive thing. It was a very, we do this because we have to, not because we want to type of thing. And that is kind of how they view the Dark Irons, who are supposed to be super steeped into the occult and magic and the dark arts. Of course you're not going to trust them. Of course you're going to inherently think that they're sneaky. It's very similar to looking at some of the magic users, like let's say DC Comics, and how many of them, quote unquote, use the dark arts and are viewed as like less trustworthy. And as a matter of fact, like they only go to them like when they absolutely have no other out. Looking at Constantine, look at Zatanna, look at like all these other magic users. It's the same thing. It's just got this inherently dark vibe to it. And yes, part of it is that they've been dealing with the Bronzebeards as well. And think about that for a second. If you are dealing with, let's say, Magni the entire time, in your relations, which, you have your tram connected, you're trading back and forth, your king and their king, or your regent and their king are dealing and trading and doing whatever they're doing, and you're hearing stories. You're hearing stories from a particular point of view about what the war was, about what Dwarven society is. And now you're informed by a very select, narrow view. And it's from the Bronzebeards, who, to them at this time, originally would have viewed it as, yeah, we were chosen as the rightful heirs of the United Dwarven Kingdoms, and they didn't want to accept us. I don't know why they didn't want to accept us, and it led to this whole big war and this loss of life and everything else.
Yeah.
It's going to color your perception.
I mean, keep in mind, too, that while dwarves live longer than humans, they're not elves. The stories we're telling you are like 2 and then 1 generation ahead of Magni and his rule. Like, Magni didn't experience any of that.
Mm-hmm.
He grew up after it. He grew up in the kingdom made by it. He grew up thinking of the Wildhammers as their distant friends and the Dark Irons as their horrible enemies. He didn't. To him, the idea that the Wildhammers and the Dark Irons ever lived in Ironforge, I mean, he might know it, but it's not what he experienced. It's not how his view of the world was shaped. We have a saying about how the victor writes the history, but we never even think about the fact that the victor lives a different history. To Bronzebeards, yeah, this is what happened. That why shouldn't we be? We were related to the Anvilmars. If the Anvilmar boy wasn't suitable to be king, who else would be? But to the other 2 clans, no. To the Wildhammers, it was simply a matter of we accepted it when it wasn't any of the other clans, when it was one specific family that ruled everybody. We accepted that. We're not accepting that your clan can just step up and be in charge of us now.
Mm-hmm.
We're your equals. We will not be ruled by you, as Joe pointed out. The Dark Iron situation, again, they had their reasons. To them, they seemed reasonable. They did not seem reasonable to the other clans. And Magni grew up in the aftermath. He grew up in the aftermath of the aftermath.
Think about the quest that we talked about earlier, where you're sent to go get his daughter back. The text on that quest is go get her from those despicable minions of darkness, essentially. Like, I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially the vibe you get. Like, it's not the go get it from our kin that, we don't see eye to eye with, or go see what's going on with it and try to get her back. It's murder him, murder everything that stands in your way. They do not matter. They are dark and evil worshippers, and bring my daughter back. That's essentially what it is. So yeah, this is his perception of it. And it's definitely tainting everybody that interacts with him around them.
And everybody loved Magni.
Yeah.
Magni was super popular in the Alliance. The humans loved him. He did multiple favors for them. His brother was Arthas's tutor.
Mm-hmm.
He accompanied Arthas to Northrend. He's the one who got hit in the head and almost killed when Arthas claimed Frostmourne. So Bronze a fixture. How many times have you seen Bronn doing quests and stuff? Bronn's a literal fixture. You constantly run into him. So the Bronzebeard family, that is, in many ways, that's how the other alliance groups see the dwarves.
Yep.
So yeah, if they think the Dark Irons are all sinister and evil, it's gonna spread. As to the way the alliance views them now, I don't know if Joe and I will agree. So I'm gonna say mine and let Joe jump in. I think they view them as useful and accept them because they're directly under Moira, but they definitely give them the side eye.
I would agree with that. And I think that's part of the thing that they're trying to change. And I think that we're going to see an element of change coming, I think, in the future because of how Moira is positioning things. And I think that's part of her end goal, is to break that stigma, which is why, she's going after the occultists. She's going against the Dark Seekers, not just to keep her son safe, but to show that she's capable of cleaning house. Like, that's a dual thing, right? look at all these Ragnaros worshiping supporters that I just rooted out and murdered to make sure that we didn't have any dark dissent in our lines. People that would move against us in the future, move against the Alliance in the future, have been removed. I'm doing what I can. I'm making the necessary sacrifices so that all of us can be safe. She's doing this very smartly. And now, when her dad comes back, he's the speaker of Azeroth. And he even says at the end of that comic, maybe we can be a family again because I was a terrible dad to you. I acknowledge that I was a horrible father to you. I can do better, but I have to do this first. I have a larger child to take care of right this moment, and then I want to come back, and I want to be part of this family again. Do you think anybody's going to tell Magni, I'm made out of diamond, Bronzebeard, no, if he's bouncing his grandson on his knee, and he says, yep, this is the king of all dwarves. I speak for Azeroth. Nobody's going to tell him no.
Yeah, no one. And she gets that, but I do also believe that she genuinely wants that for herself and her son. She
absolutely does.
Not just as a maneuvering ploy. That's why she's a fascinating character. She can simultaneously make emotional decisions, but at the same time, she keeps her eye on what those emotional decisions will do.
She is probably the best leader in the Alliance, as far as I'm concerned, in regards of that.
Yeah, at least right now. Yeah.
At least right now, because if you look at every other leader in the Alliance, every single one of them makes very emotional decisions. Again, Greymane's getting better. Like, he's getting a lot better about it, but every other single one of them, even Anduin, is 100% led by their emotions, and the consequences be damned.
Yeah, I think Jaina has actually also pulled back from that a bit.
I would agree,
yeah. Jaina is probably the second best, but Moira is the one who keeps her eyes on the prize.
Yep.
Like, she doesn't make stupid decisions because they would make her feel better. Decisions she makes are based entirely on her goals. She may have feelings, and she will show those feelings, but she does not let her feelings endanger what she has been trying to do.
Yeah.
That was a lot of us rambling based on your question. Remember, Blade?
But thank you very much for sending that in. I always like talking about Dark Iron Dwarves. I really do. I think they're fascinating.
I think generally we both like talking about dwarves in general.
I would agree.
WoW,
yeah.
Because they have a really interesting history that doesn't get touched on nearly enough.
I would agree as
well.
All
the distant, we get a lot of the Titan stuff. We get a lot of the Earthen and long, long ago stuff. But they've got stuff that's much more recent, like the whole thing we just talked about, that very rarely comes up.
And to understand that they were a powerhouse of an empire for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And to acknowledge that or to talk about that is always great. I'm always going to be happy to discuss that because I think they are my favorite Alliance race. I will flat out say that. I think that they have some of the most intricate and complicated backstory, and I'm here for it. But I think that's going to do it for us today, folks. Blizzard Watch is made possible due to the generous contributions at patreon.com/BlizzardWatch. Your continued support means this podcast signing community is able to thrive and grow. Blizzard Watch supporters enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to the podcast, better chance at having your question answered on our podcast or the queue, and an ads-free site experience. And if you do have questions for this podcast or any of our other podcasts, this includes Tavern Watch or the Blizzard Watch podcast, be sure to send them into podcast at, wow. I can't talk today, folks. I apologize. Podcast at blizzardwatch.com. Just make sure you specify which show the question is for. If you are a Patreon supporter, you can go ahead and use our Patreon supporter channel. We have a patron Q and podcast questions channel. Go ahead and throw them there. We tend to look there first as a way of saying thank you for those that do support us on Patreon. And if not, and you don't want to send an email, we do have a regular Q questions channel. You can throw them in there. Again, just specify what show it is for. And as a last reminder, folks, all of us at Blizzard Watch continue to stand with the employees of Activision Blizzard and the entire game industry as a whole in demanding change for a better tomorrow, a safer work environment. So thank you very much, folks. We'll see you next week.